In 1989, Brad McCrimmon lifted the Stanley Cup, hockey's most prestigious trophy. 22 years later, he was expected to do the same, this time as the head coach of a Russian team. He had a strong roster, a grand plan, and was just one flight away from the season's opening game. But instead of arriving at the arena, the plane carrying him and his entire team plummeted toward the Volga River. 44 people, including Brad McCrimmon and goalie Stefan Liv, would never get the chance to live out their dreams. Was it a tragic accident, or were there other truths hidden behind the wreckage? This is the story of one of those men, a hockey legend whose journey began far from the international spotlight. Brad McCrimmon, born in 1959, he grew up on the family farm, where the lessons of responsibility, humility, and a relentless work ethic were instilled in him from his earliest days. Life on the prairie teaches you a fundamental truth: you reap what you sow. There are no shortcuts. In small prairie towns like Plenty, life revolves around two seasons: farming season and hockey season. The local arena, often a cold, simple building with hard wooden benches, is the heart of the community. It's the place where families gather on frigid winter nights to escape the isolation of the farm, to socialize, and to cheer on their local heroes. For a young, talented kid like Brad, hockey wasn't just a sport. It was a way of life, a path to a world beyond the endless fields of wheat. He was a natural. From a young age, it was clear that he possessed a special talent for the game. But more than that, he had a temperament, a quiet intensity, and a profound understanding of the sport that set him apart. He left home as a teenager to play junior hockey, a rite of passage for so many Canadian kids, moving to Brandon, Manitoba, to play for the Brandon Wheat Kings of the Western Hockey League. The WHL of the 1970s was a notoriously tough, brawling league. It was the Wild West of junior hockey, a place where skill was important, but survival was paramount. It was not a league for the faint of heart, and it was here, in this brutal, high-intensity league, that Brad McCrimmon became a legend. He wasn't just a skilled player, he was a dominant force. He was a defenseman, a position usually reserved for stay-at-home defensive players. But McCrimmon shattered that mold. He was a brilliant puck mover, a commanding presence on the ice with a booming shot. In his final season with the Wheat Kings, in 1978-79, he did something almost unheard of for a defenseman. He scored 98 points. He was named the league's Defenseman of the Year, not once, but twice. He led his team, a powerhouse that included other future NHL stars like Brian Propp, to a league championship. That 1978-79 Brandon Wheat Kings team is still considered one of the greatest junior teams of all time. They put together a regular season record of 58 wins, 5 losses, and 9 ties, a staggering display of dominance. They were a machine, and McCrimmon was their engine. That year, they went all the way to the final of the Memorial Cup, the ultimate prize in Canadian junior hockey. The final was held in the legendary Montreal Forum, and in a dramatic, heartbreaking game against the Peterborough Petes, they lost in overtime. It was his first taste of a major championship battle, a painful defeat that would fuel his competitive fire for years to come. By the time he left Brandon, he was, by a wide margin, the best junior hockey defenseman in all of Canada. The National Hockey League came calling. In 1979, he was drafted in the first round, 15th overall, by the Boston Bruins. The kid from the small farm in Plenty, Saskatchewan, was heading to big leagues. His dream was coming true. Brad McCrimmon's transition to the NHL was seamless. He stepped into the league and immediately established himself as a reliable top-4 defenseman. His first stint was with the Boston Bruins, a tough veteran team where he played alongside another future Hall of Fame defenseman, Ray Bourque. It was a perfect place for a young player to learn the ropes. But it was after a trade to the Philadelphia Flyers in 1982 that he truly came into his own and became one of the premier defensive players in the entire sport. The Flyers of the 1980s were a powerhouse team. The legacy of the Broad Street Bullies from the 70s still lingered, but this was a new era. A team led by a fiery young coach named Mike Keenan that blended skill with that traditional toughness. It was here that McCrimmon formed one of the most celebrated defensive pairings of the decade with his partner, the sublimely talented, offensive-minded Hall of Famer, Mark Howe. They were a perfect yin-yang. Howe was the artist, a fluid skater who would rush the puck up the ice, creating scoring chances. McCrimmon was the rock, the stay-at-home anchor who provided the defensive stability that allowed Howe to take risks. It was also in Philadelphia that he earned his iconic nickname, Beast. The name might conjure images of a bare-knuckle brawler, but that wasn't McCrimmon's game. He was given the name by his teammates because of his incredible, almost inhuman strength and his legendary work ethic in the gym. He was a fitness fanatic in an era when many players were not. This dedication translated to his play on the ice. He was rarely flashy, but he was almost perfectly reliable. He was a master of the simple, effective play, the crisp first pass out of the defensive zone, the smart positional play, the physical separation of an opposing forward from the puck. He was the kind of player who didn't end up on the highlight reels, but who was on the ice for all the important moments, quietly shutting down the other team's best players. His value was best measured by a statistic that many casual fans don't even notice: plus-minus. Plus-minus is a simple but telling stat. If you are on the ice when your team scores an even-strength goal, you get a +1. If you're on the ice when the other team scores, you get a -1. A player with a high plus-minus rating is a player who, quite simply, makes good things happen when he is on the ice. Over the course of his 18-year career, Brad McCrimmon amassed a plus-minus rating of +444. To put that in perspective, that is the 10th highest rating in the entire history of the National Hockey League. It is a staggering number, a testament to a career built on quiet, consistent excellence. His leadership was recognized by his peers. In 1985, he was named the captain of the Philadelphia Flyers, one of the proudest franchises in the league. He led the team on 2 incredible runs to the Stanley Cup finals in 1985 and 1987. Both times, they faced the dynastic Edmonton Oilers, a team led by Wayne Gretzky and considered one of the greatest offensive powerhouses in hockey history. And both times, the Flyers fell just short. It was McCrimmon, the captain and shutdown defenseman, who was tasked with the impossible job of trying to stop Gretzky. It was a heroic, but ultimately losing, battle. The 1987 series, in particular, is considered one of the greatest finals of all time, with the underdog Flyers pushing the mighty Oilers to a full 7 games. It was a heartbreaking loss, but a testament to the character of the team that McCrimmon led. He was at the peak of his powers, a respected leader on a contending team. But the world of professional sports is a business, a hard, unsentimental one, and McCrimmon was about to learn a lesson about loyalty. After the 1987 season, his contract was up. McCrimmon felt he had earned a significant raise, one that would make him one of the highest-paid defensemen in the league. The Flyers' general manager was the legendary Bobby Clarke, himself a former captain and a notoriously tough negotiator. Clarke disagreed with McCrimmon's valuation. Neither man would back down. The contract dispute became a bitter public holdout, and in the end, Clarke made a shocking decision. He traded his captain. McCrimmon was sent to the Calgary Flames. The trade was a bombshell, and it was deeply unpopular with the fans and players in Philadelphia. For McCrimmon, it was a painful moment, a reminder that no matter how much you give to a team, you are ultimately an asset that can be bought and sold. But the move to Calgary, born of professional conflict, would lead to the greatest moment of his playing career. The Flames of the late 1980s were a juggernaut, a team loaded with future Hall of Famers like Lanny McDonald, Al McInnes, and Joe Nieuwendyk. McCrimmon was brought in to be a stabilizing, veteran presence on their blue line, the final piece of a championship puzzle. And in the spring of 1989, he reached the pinnacle of the sport. The Calgary Flames defeated the Montreal Canadiens in a hard-fought series to win the Stanley Cup. Brad McCrimmon, the kid from the farm in Plenty, Saskatchewan, was a champion. He would go on to play for several more years, rounding out his career with the Detroit Red Wings, Hartford Whalers, and Phoenix Coyotes. When he finally hung up his skates in 1997, his incredible journey spanned 1,222 games. It was a career that had taken the quiet kid from a Saskatchewan farm and transformed him into a junior hockey legend, a respected NHL captain, and finally, a Stanley Cup champion with the Calgary Flames. In every city he played, he was the same person, a respected veteran, a mentor to the younger players, and a man who led by quiet example. But as one chapter closed, he wasn't done with the game he loved. A new dream, a new and even more challenging journey, was just beginning to take shape. After retiring as a player, Brad McCrimmon immediately transitioned into coaching. For many great players, the move from the ice to the bench is a difficult one. The game that came so naturally to them is often something they struggle to teach. But for McCrimmon, it was a natural fit. His incredible hockey IQ, his calm, steady demeanor, and the immense respect he had earned over nearly 2 decades in the league made him a perfect teacher of the game. He began his second career as an assistant coach, a long and often thankless journey that took him to cities all across the league. It was a journey that would last for 14 years, a long and patient apprenticeship for a job he coveted more than anything, to be a head coach. He started with the New York Islanders, getting his first taste of life behind an NHL bench. But he knew he still had much to learn. In a move that demonstrated his humility, he took a step back from the NHL to go where he could truly learn the craft of being the man in charge. He returned to his roots, to his home province, taking the head coaching job of the Saskatoon Blades in the same Western Hockey League where he had once been a superstar player. For 2 seasons, he was the head coach, responsible for every aspect of the team, from drawing up plays to mentoring the teenage players. It was his only head coaching experience, a crucial line on his resume that proved he could, in fact, lead a team. From there, he returned to the NHL, embarking on a long tour of duty as one of the league's most sought-after assistant coaches. He returned to Calgary as an assistant with the Flames, the city where he had won his Stanley Cup. He moved on to the Atlanta Thrashers, taking on the challenge of trying to build a winning culture in a struggling expansion franchise. And then, in 2008, he landed a coveted job as an associate coach with one of the most successful and respected franchises in all of professional sports, the Detroit Red Wings. His time in Detroit was a validation of his coaching abilities. He worked under the brilliant, demanding head coach, Mike Babcock, and he was put in charge of the team's defensemen. The Red Wings of that era were a dynasty, a team loaded with European skill and North American grit. McCrimmon was a key part of their success. He coached some of the greatest defensemen in the world, including the legendary Nicklas Lidstrom, who is widely considered one of the best to ever play the position. Even a player like Lidstrom, a master of the game, would listen intently when Brad spoke. He commanded that kind of respect. In his first season with the Red Wings, they went all the way to the Stanley Cup finals. The season before he arrived, they had won it all. Brad McCrimmon was a winner, as a player and now as a coach. Year after year, he was considered one of the best assistant coaches in the league, a brilliant defensive mind who was ready for the next step. And year after year, his name would come up whenever a head coaching job opened up in the NHL. He would get interviews, he would be a finalist, and year after year, he would be passed over. This became the central, quiet frustration of his post-playing career. Why was Brad McCrimmon, a man so universally respected, a man with such a brilliant hockey mind and a championship pedigree, stuck in the role of the perennial assistant? Was he seen as too old school in a game that was becoming increasingly focused on speed and offense? Was his quiet, no-nonsense personality not flashy enough for the modern era of media-savvy head coaches? Or was it simply a case of bad luck, of being in the wrong place at the wrong time? It was a source of deep, private frustration for McCrimmon. He had paid his dues 10 times over. He had learned his craft under some of the best coaches in the world, like the legendary Scotty Bowman in Detroit. He knew he was ready. He was just waiting for his chance, for one general manager to look past the lack of flash and see the substance, the character, the winner underneath. In the spring of 2011, that chance finally arrived, from a place he never expected. The offer came from the Continental Hockey League, or KHL, the premier professional hockey league in Russia. The KHL of that era was a league with massive ambitions and deep-pocketed owners, actively trying to position itself as a global rival to the NHL. The team was Lokomotiv Yaroslavl, a powerhouse organization, one of the top teams in the entire league, with a passionate fan base and a history of success. They weren't just offering him an assistant's job. They were offering him the head coaching position. For McCrimmon, this was the moment he had worked towards his entire life. It was the head coaching job he had earned, the respect he had been waiting for. He spoke with his wife, Maureen, and their 2 children, Carlin and Liam. It was a big decision, a move halfway across the world to a different culture, a different language. But they knew how much this meant to him. His daughter Carlin later said, "It was his dream. As a family, we were all so excited for him. He had worked so hard for so long, for this moment. He was so happy, so energized. He spent that whole summer preparing, watching video, planning his systems. He was finally getting his shot." In May of 2011, Brad McCrimmon signed his contract and became the head coach of Lokomotiv Yaroslavl. The quiet man from the prairies of Saskatchewan was finally, after all those years of waiting, in charge of his own team. The tragedy of what happened next is almost impossible to comprehend. It was a perfect storm of human error and bad luck that resulted in one of the darkest days in sports history. On September 7th, 2011, the Lokomotiv Yaroslavl hockey team was preparing to start their season. They were a team with legitimate championship aspirations, a roster filled with stars from Russia, Sweden, Germany, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and, of course, their new Canadian head coach, Brad McCrimmon. They were a band of brothers, a multinational collection of elite talent united by their love of the game. That afternoon, they boarded their team plane, a Yak-42 charter aircraft, at the local airport in Yaroslavl. Their destination was Minsk, Belarus, for the first game of the KHL season. It was the moment Brad McCrimmon had been working towards for over 2 decades, his debut as a head coach, his team, his dream. But the plane would never make it to Minsk. Eyewitnesses on the ground, including airport workers and local fishermen, described a horrifying scene. The plane struggled down the runway, failing to gain enough speed to lift off properly. It ran off the end of the tarmac, ploughing through the grass for several hundred yards, its engines screaming. It finally, briefly, became airborne, but it was too low and too slow. It clipped a communications tower just beyond the airport perimeter, and then, in a massive fireball, it crashed into the banks of the Volga River. Of the 45 people on board, 37 players and team officials and 8 crew members. 44 were killed, either in the impact of the crash itself or in the inferno that followed. An entire team, one of the best and most beloved in the world, was wiped out in an instant. Brad McCrimmon, the man who had waited his entire life for this day, was dead. He never got to coach his first game. The news of the Lokomotiv Yaroslavl air disaster sent a shockwave of grief and disbelief through the entire world. It was a tragedy of almost unimaginable scale. The hockey community is a small, tight-knit family, and the loss was felt in every arena, in every locker room, from Russia to North America. The list of the dead was a tragic roll call of beloved players, many of whom had spent years in the NHL and had friends on every team. Players like Pavel Demitra, Ruslan Salei, and Josef Vasicek. At the arena in Minsk, where Lokomotiv was scheduled to play, the news broke during the opening ceremony of another game. The arena fell into a stunned, heartbreaking silence as thousands of fans and players wept together. The official investigation into the crash, conducted by Russian authorities, revealed a catastrophic and ultimately preventable series of failures. The report concluded that the disaster was caused by pilot error. One of the pilots had been improperly applying the brakes with his feet during the takeoff roll, a fatal mistake that prevented the plane from reaching a safe flying speed. The investigation also revealed a shocking lack of proper training for the crew on that specific type of aircraft, and that one of the pilots may have used falsified documents to gain permission to fly the plane. It was later revealed that the pilot had a sedating drug, phenobarbital, in his system. It was a tragedy born of negligence, a senseless loss of life that never should have happened. For the families of the victims, and for the entire hockey world, this conclusion only added to the heartbreak. These men weren't the victims of a random act of fate. They were the victims of a broken, negligent system. Brad McCrimmon's legacy is one of quiet excellence and a life lived with integrity. He is remembered as a Stanley Cup champion, one of the greatest defensemen of his generation, and a great teammate who was universally respected. His death in the Russian plane crash carries a painful irony. A man whose entire career was defined by consistency and reliability fell victim to a bungled and catastrophic failure. The tragedy robbed him of his lifelong dream of becoming a head coach before he could begin. His legacy, however, is not defined by unfulfilled ambition, but by his character. He was a champion, a proud husband and father, and a teacher who never got to teach his first game, but whose life was a powerful lesson in integrity.